The latest Star Wars series, The Acolyte, got canceled after just one season, and it kind of came as, I'm not going to say a surprise, but it's unusual for Disney to basically announce right after a show is concluded that they're not renewing it for a second season. Usually, Disney wouldn't like to announce that they're not going to be doing it. They would just prefer to kind of not address the issue and then just keep it on the back burner. Then eventually when people ask about it, they're like, oh yeah, that show, yeah, we're just not doing anything with that anymore. That's kind of how they try to handle things. But when they're actually coming out and saying that they're going to cancel something or they're not renewing it and make a public statement about it, it's usually an indicator the show isn't very well received. We saw that when it came to viewership numbers, and we can see that on Rotten Tomatoes with the audience and critic scores. For critics, it was lukewarm. For audience, it was a pretty abysmal 18%, but I will give it credit because this is up because it got down to, I think, as low as 3% at one point. So 18% is somewhat of an improvement, but a lot of fans of this series haven't really been taking it too well. But there might be some hope from, after all, at least according to this article from Forbes with the headline, "A Glimmer of Hope for the Acolyte Season 2. Now, scrolling down into this article, The Acolyte continues to be one of the most significant sagas of the Disney Star Wars era, given the sheer push and pull of the fans and detractors of the show, plus Disney spending insane amounts of money on it compared to the viewership it would ever possibly draw. It was canceled after season 1, but now there may be at least some small glimmer of hope for a season 2. And this article does confirm that it was because of the lack of viewership is the reason why Disney canceled the show, and not because of low review scores or anything like that, because a lot of fans of the Acolyte have been trying to say it's because it got review bombed and that's why they're pulling the plug on it. And no, Disney won't do that. If the show was getting views and it was making money, then they would have continued on with it. They don't care if it had a 0% on all review aggregate sites from audience scores, or if it had 10 billion dislikes on their YouTube videos. That doesn't matter to them because that doesn't equate to money. What equates to money is viewership, and it just wasn't there. And I know some people are going to try to say it's like, oh no, it's because it got review bombed. That's the reason people didn't watch the show. But that doesn't really hold water when you think that there was more viewership in the first few episodes of The Acolyte than there was in the last episodes, which indicates that people actually tuned into the show and checked out because they gave it a fair shot. They didn't like it, so they stopped watching it. Plain and simple. The show just wasn't good, and that's why people didn't watch it. If you're one of the people who actually liked the show, great. I hope you enjoyed it, at least enjoyed the season that you got, but just understand that the majority of people just don't agree with you. But still, a lot of these Acolyte fans are upset about this decision, not because they think the show should be renewed or anything like that, just because they don't want the other side to have a win. Listen to this from the article. The Acolyte being canceled thanks to lack of viewership. Its cast has been vocal about the harassment from toxic fans they believe are being rewarded by the killing of the show. And while it may indeed be a cost versus viewership decision, I am not entirely convinced the show's death is set in stone. Now, just trying to renew a show and have Disney lose a bunch of money just to own the other side is not really a good business decision. They might think Disney cares about their political views or anything like that. Well, that's really not the case. Disney will just do what they'll do because they think it'll make them money, and they saw catering to your crowd doesn't make money, so they're going to try to change course, or at least they should change course if they're going to be smart business owners. But let's continue on with this because it does say there might be some hope for this. So let's dive into what that could actually mean. The new evidence is from the stranger himself, Manny Jacinto, who appears to not be giving up hope, courtesy of a few quotes from DragonCon this past week. In one clip, he's asked about one thing he wants to achieve before he dies, and he says, to much applause, season 2 of The Acolyte. Well, I don't think that's really much of a statement, all things considered, because he's obviously talking about The Acolyte. So what is he going to say? To never see it happen again or do some other project or whatever? It's like, no, he's going to kind of cater to the crowd and tell them what they want to hear, and that people who are fans of The Acolyte were there. So he's going to want to say something that gets an applause from the crowd, and it seems like that's what he did. This joins an earlier quote that does not have an attached video where Jacinto reportedly told a fan they were still fighting for the show, indicating there still may be some talks behind the scene about bringing it back in some form or another. It basically says, even though we don't have that last statement on video, it kind of coincides with a statement that he has made in public before. So maybe there is some talks being done behind the scenes in order to try to renew the show. And this wouldn't be the first time that a show has been brought back after it was previously canceled. But the article points out that it would be a tall order given how much money it actually cost to produce the first season. It says here the reported cost $180 million and featured things like unnecessary CGI space battles, when the best moments of the season were just two characters talking to each other, or at its priciest, an extremely cool lightsaber fight in the jungle. The idea is season 2 can work with a much smaller budget, and maybe this can still happen. And I said that in the past too, that I think if this was a show that was made like with $20 million or something like that, then you probably could have gotten it renewed for a second season. But the way it was, it cost too much money to make. I think it'd be kind of funny if Disney's like, okay, we will renew it for a second season, but it's going to be a significantly smaller budget than what the first season was. And that would mean the entire cast would have to get pay cuts as a result of that. Then you get people like Manny Jacinto like, well, I'm not going to sign on for it if I'm going to have to take a pay cut. And then he just decides to leave. In fact, maybe this is me just being a little bit cynical, but I think that's probably why he wants to actually have it renewed for a second season, because I'm sure the paycheck working for Disney Star Wars property is probably pretty good. So maybe he's like, I don't want to see that dry up. So yeah, let's try to get another season of this because I need to keep that gravy train going. I don't know. Maybe he actually does like working on the project, but I just think that's kind of funny to imagine like it gets renewed for another season and you have like all the main actors like Manny Jacinto and Amandla Stenberg decide to just leave because they're not making as much money on it, and then they just replace them with, I don't know, someone else, or just try to change up the story a bit. There's also this idea this would be a symbiotic statement to toxic fans who have celebrated the series' death like Ewoks banking on Stormtroopers' helmets. It would push back on the worst parts of the Star Wars fandom. Actually, I think canceling it is probably pushing back on the worst parts of the Star Wars fandom by removing a win and open the door to more non-Skywalker hybrid. Okay, I do like the idea about trying to get away from the Star Wars stuff. That's why the season 1 of The Mandalorian is probably the best Star Wars series that they've actually produced to date. And that's because it was something completely separated. Then later on, they were trying to bring it back to Luke Skywalker and the Skywalkers and just bring back all these familiar characters. And I didn't like when they were doing that because I think the galaxy felt like it was bigger when it was just the Mandalorian doing his own thing and just kind of working on stuff that was completely separate from everything else. But then when everything just starts kind of colliding together, it feels like it's a small galaxy when you just constantly getting cameos from all these familiar faces like this. And I do like the idea if they're trying to do something different, especially like the High Republic area. I think you can do some stuff with that. And that's not my issue with the show. My issue is just it wasn't handled well. And maybe you could actually renew it if they had a more competent showrunner. But as it stands, we got what we got. And the actual Star Wars fans spoke. They didn't like it, and this is the result of it. So people holding out hope that there's probably going to be another season. They're going so far as to create this petition. And on all honesty, I don't expect this to actually work because, I mean, you can look at it right here. It's gotten less than 65,000, and this was created August 20th. So in that time frame, they can't even get enough people to actually sign on to it, because with as much as it costs to actually produce the show, you would probably need to have millions of signatures on this in order for Disney to actually give it any notice. And since they couldn't even get 65,000 within this time frame, it just goes to show that the audience for this is just simply not there. So for the people out there thinking that their perspective is the popular one and that's why this show needs to continue and everyone else is just the toxic fans, well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but we've heard what you have to say and everyone is just rejecting it. But for all the other sensible people watching this, let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And if you can, click that like button and share the video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.